How does this total expenditure curves comes about? You can look at the diagram D in your slide. Total expenditure is measured on the vertical axis and real GDP on the horizontal axis. So what happens is that the total expenditure curve will have an upward slope, and it doesn't start at 0. The reason for that is the vertical intercept of your total expenditure curve is determined by the autonomous spending. Remember, autonomous consumption, investment and government expenditure. Even if YD is 0, there will still be consumption. So this is why it doesn't start here. The total expenditure, and it's upward sloping. The slope is determined by the MPC. How much of additional income is going to be spent is determined by the marginal propensity to consume, which might be 0.8 or whatever, right? Okay. So total expenditure, this is how the total expenditure curves looks like. As real GDP increase, as income increase in the economy, there will be more expenditure, right? But the expenditure will depend on the marginal propensity to consume. And total expenditure consists of C plus I plus G. So you don't need to know where does total expenditure comes from. You know it consists of the consumption curve, the investment curve, and the government expenditure curve. And we assume that investment is constant. That's why you see it like this, irrespective of the real GDP. And government expenditure is also remaining constant. We assume in this model that even if there's a change in the real GDP, it doesn't change investment and government expenditure. Okay, so now we know where the TE curve is coming from. It doesn't fall from the sky. It is derived from the C curve, the I curve, and the G curve, which is added together, basically, and we get the TE curve. Okay, right. Now we can look at the whole Keynesian model in the TE-TP framework. Now you have to be able to draw this diagram. Okay. Now it's a very simple diagram. So we start on the vertical axis, TE-TP, total expenditure, total production, and then on the horizontal axis, real GDP. And the first thing that you draw is what we call a 45-degree line. This is a 45-degree line. Now this 45-degree line indicate also this is the total production, which is equal to the real GDP. So all points on this 45-degree line is, where total, it indicates total production or the real GDP. So this is what you need to know. Then what you also need to know is that on the horizontal axis, we measure the real GDP. On the vertical axis, the total expenditure and total production. Then we have what we call the total expenditure curve, which we have already derived, which consists of C plus I plus G. Okay, and we know it starts here because of autonomous consumption or spending in the economy. Okay, now I'm not going through this whole diagram, but what is important is that the 45-degree line, as they mentioned there, it is called the 45-degree line. This is 45 degrees because it bisects the 90-degree angle at the origin, right? Okay. So the implication of that is that, where all points where the TE curve intersects the TP curve, it's where the economy is in equilibrium. So where the TP curve intersects the TP curve, that indicates the economy in equilibrium, where TE is equal to TP. Okay, so this is one state of the economy according to the total expenditure and total. When the economy is in equilibrium, total expenditure is equal to total product, to real GDP, total production. What happens in this case? Okay, so this is QE, or say this is TE. So at this level of total expenditure and total production, the economy will be in equilibrium. Okay. Now what happens if we producing maybe Q1 or Q2? Okay, let's say Q2. Okay, then what will now happen in the economy? What will now happen? We will see that, and that will be your TE. So if you look at the diagram there, that exhibit there, maybe we can look at the diagram at Q2. What will be the case? total expenditure, you can see there is how much? Total expenditure, it's greater than total production, because total production at Q2 is 10.4 trillion and total expenditure at Q2 is 10.6. So it means that total expenditure is greater than total production at Q2. Now, if that is the case, then the economy is in disequilibrium. There is greater spending than production of goods and services in the economy. Now, what is the effect on that on inventories? That is very, very important. There is more spending than the production of goods and services, and that is what is mentioned there. Then a firm's inventories, there's an unplanned decrease in inventories of their stock, right? Okay, or their stock. So what happens then? If the inventories decrease, it means that they have to then increase their production to build up their stock to what they call optimum inventory levels, an inventory level that is, for them, that can deal with any eventuality, if their demand for their product increase suddenly or decrease, right? So every firm has got what we call an optimum inventory level. Now, what happens because of this? More people are demanding their goods and services than they have. There's an unplanned decrease in inventory levels. So what is the effect on production? They have to increase their production to come back to your previous inventory level. So it will lead to firms raising production, and then up till where? Q2 will increase again to QE, and then the economy will be back to an equilibrium. Okay? So that is what you need to know. How will the economy move from disequilibrium to equilibrium where T is equal to TP? Let's look at the other example. Let's look at where they're producing Q1. Okay, so if they're producing Q1, what will TE be? Or Q, in this case, it will be 11.0 trillion US dollars, the real GDP. And what will be the total expenditure at that level will be 10.8. You can look at Exhibit 12 in the textbook to work through it. So it simply means that total production is greater than total expenditure in this case. So if we go back to the previous slide at Q1, what will happen? TE is smaller than TP. 10.8 is smaller than 11. So what is actually happened? There's an overproduction of goods and services. The total expenditure, the demand for goods and services in the economy, the total is less than the total production of goods and services. So what will happen with inventories? That is the important thing. The change in inventories will get the economy from a disequilibrium back to equilibrium, right? So that is important. What will happen now with the firm's inventories? There's more production than expenditure. And as you can see, there will be an unexpected increase unsold stock. Now that will then be a signal for firms to decrease their production because they don't want to sit with unsold stock. So that will lead to a cut in production, and then what will happen? There will be the real GDP will decrease from Q1 back to equilibrium, and then the economy will be back to equilibrium. So what we have illustrated basically here are the three states of the economy in terms of this framework. The economy can be, TE can be what? Can be greater than TP. TE is equal to TP when the economy is in equilibrium, or the other is that TE can be, as it's indicated, smaller than TP. In this case, the economy is in disequilibrium. In this case, the economy is in equilibrium. Now, what will happen if the economy is in disequilibrium? A firm's inventory will either increase or decrease, and this will lead to either increase in production or decrease in production, and then the economy will be back into long-run equilibrium. Into equilibrium where T is equal to TP. So it's important that you know the three states of the economy in the TE-TP framework. And what is important is that especially this diagram. It indicates to you the three states of the economy, and then what happens to inventories and what will firms do. They will either increase production or they will cut production, okay, to raise inventories or to reduce inventories to get back to optimum levels. So please make sure that you know this summary. And then you know, the equilibrium position, inventories are at the optimum levels, and firms will neither increase or decrease production. Okay, so that is the summary of the three states of the economy. And then just lastly, you know, in terms of this diagram, in terms of the TP framework, because, you know, I will ask you normally in the exam, when you do the calculations of Keynes, you will have to illustrate, you know, the Keynesian model in this framework. So you need to be able to draw this diagram. So let's illustrate the Keynesian model in the TETP framework. So remember to label your axis. This is the real GDP. Okay, the first curve is your 45-degree line, and you label that 45-degree line, which is your TP, which is equal to the real GDP. Remember, real GDP is actually also TP on the horizontal axis, is the same thing, right? Okay, so don't get confused. Okay, so this is your 45-degree line. Then you draw your TE curve, which starts not at the origin because of the autonomous spinning, right? And that is your TE curve, which consists of C plus I plus G, and the slope of this curve is determined by the MPC. Okay, we know that. Now, where the two intersect at point A, at that point the economy is in equilibrium, producing Q, say QE, or what Q1. So at point A, TE is equal to TP. Okay, so there is the economy in equilibrium, and you can also, it's not indicated here, but you know, we can say this is TE maybe 1, where T is equal to TP. Okay, so this is the economy in equilibrium according to Keynes. But the economy is also in which gap? Because now if we draw, the economy is not producing Q, the natural real GDP. The natural real GDP is to the left, to the right of the real GDP, QN. So the economy is not at full employment. So there's a recessionary gap. Okay. So according to Keynes, the economy is in equilibrium, but at the same time in a recessionary gap. And that is very, very important. Okay, because it's in a recessionary gap because the real GDP is less than the natural real GDP. Okay, so you need to understand that the economy is in equilibrium, but in a recessionary gap at the same time according to Keynes. And this is the illustration that we have here. Okay, so the economy is at point A, but not here at point B. And something must be done to get the economy from point A to point B, or from QE to QN. And who must play the dominant role? There must be an increase in government expenditure according to Keynes. Okay, so we summarize the Keynesian model according to the total expenditure, total production framework. Is basically the same as the ADA's framework. The model is still the same. It's just, you know, the framework is different. So, you know, the price level remains constant until the natural real GDP is being reached. The TE curve, this curve, you know, will only change. You remember the AD curve will shift to the right if there's a change in C, I and G. But in the TEP framework, this curve will shift upwards. Now I won't test you on that. Or this curve will shift downwards if there's also a change in C or I and G. The total expenditure curve will either move to upwards or downwards, right? But what will change the TE is the same what will change AD, C, I and G. And then, you know, an economy can be in equilibrium but also in a recessionary gap at the same time. And then also the private sector cannot get the economy out of a recessionary gap. Even if interest rates are very low, there will still be not enough investment taking place. And then who must play the dominant role in the economy to raise total expenditure is the government, because government expenditure is part of total expenditure. So if that can be increased, total expenditure will also increase. And then the economy will move from the real GDP to the natural real GDP. Okay, so this is basically the flow chart of the simple Keynesian model in terms of the TETP framework, which is basically the same, is that what is the reason why the government want to intervene in the economy and to stimulate aggregate demand or total expenditure so that there can be an increase in the real GDP. So that if there's an increase in the real GDP, economic growth will take place. And if economic growth will take place, unemployment will come down. That is actually what this the Keynesian model is trying to illustrate. But the focus here in the Keynesian model is on government expenditure to do that. Okay, so yeah, you can just look at this framework in terms of the flow chart, and basically that concludes the Keynesian model, which actually is not difficult. You need to understand what is the purpose of the model, what is the assumptions, that is the starting point. Then you need to look at, firstly, also how does the Keynesian model differ from the classical view of the economy in chapter 9 in terms of Say's law, in terms of wages, in terms of prices, in terms of interest rates. Then you look at the assumptions of the model, because each model has assumptions. And then you look at the building blocks of the model. It consists of consumption, the consumption function, the marginal propensity to consume, the marginal propensity to save, the saving function. It looks at the multiplier process, very, very important. And then it brings everything together into the ADAS framework. It also looks at the AS curve in the Keynesian model, which is horizontal and vertical. And that has implication for government trying to stimulate the economy. If it's in the horizontal part, then basically it will lead to an increase in the real GDP. But if aggregate demand is increased in the vertical part, will only increase the price level. And that is another problem. Inflation will increase, that the government has to deal with from the monetary side of the economy, the Reserve Bank. Okay, and then also what is illustrated in the TETP framework is that also the economy can be in a recessionary gap, but in equilibrium as well, right? Okay, and the private sector cannot get the economy out of a recessionary gap. The government must play the dominant role. Okay, so yeah, this is more or less the Keynesian model, which is very, very important. There will be a lot of marks allocated in the exam on this model, where you have to draw diagrams, you need to know concepts, you need to be able to do calculations. Now, on the Moodle site, I've included the calculations on the Keynesian model from, if you go to the second semester test of 2012, you will see there question 5. And I've also included the answers, how you work out the answers to question 5. Okay, so in the time that is still available, I will just look at question 5, on the Moodle site, and it's also available for you to work through. And then during the contact sessions, I will also work out other calculations. But you can also see on the Moodle site there are different kind of calculations. But the calculations are very simple because you have to apply formulas to that.